Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us here on the Infinite Prosperity Podcast. My name is Louisa Havers, and I help high achievers, entrepreneurs, and coaches lift the lid on life and business so that they can live at their highest value. Each episode, we will bring you our favorite founders, CEOs, and guest experts to share with you their insights and strategies to expand your wealth consciousness, your spiritual leadership, and aligned business strategies. We know that living in alignment with your soul's mission is what fulfills you, and we are here to show you how to achieve this in an energetically aligned way. If you haven't already, be sure to claim your free abundance activation in the Akashic Records. Go to louisahavers.com/gift to unlock your abundance activation today. And if you'd like my support in having aligned success in life and business, then contact me at www.louisahavers.com and let's explore together if it's an aligned match. Get ready to live at your highest value and to expand into your next level of money as you elevate and receive more. You create more for others. Righty ho, let's dive into today's episode. Welcome back, everybody. Welcome. This week, I have a very special guest, Dr. Don St. John. Don, I'm going to introduce you by sharing your bio. Don has been working with people as a psychotherapist, somatic therapist, and teacher since 1968. He is the author of the award-winning book, Healing the Wounds of Childhood, and its sequel, Healing the Wounds of Childhood and Culture, an adventure of a lifetime. He has developed a 4-component model of healing based on both his professional work and his personal healing journey of almost 60 years. Wow, a huge welcome, Don.
Thank you. Delighted to be here with you.
Oh, I'm so excited we managed to get the conversation in, because I know we've been trying to plan this for a while. So would love to, let's start at the beginning. How did you get to doing what you're doing now in your work? What was the journey?
Oh, it's quite a journey. I would have never been able to predict that I'm doing now. Back when I was in my 20s, uh, I had no idea what to do after high school. So I went in the military, developed some bad habits, and I'm making a long story as succinct as possible. uh, I realized I needed help, and I went to see a psychotherapist, a psychiatrist, and he put the idea in my head that I should go get a PhD, which I thought was ridiculous because I barely went to high school. I dragged my body through, uh, but I had no academic interest whatsoever. And just several years later, I found myself in a PhD program at the University of Kansas. And I was pretty near completion when a series of events led me to realize that I wasn't interested in what they were teaching. And I had to find what was real about, working with people. So I went to California in search of the real stuff, and some 50 years later wrote that book, which put it all together, both my personal experience and my professional studies over all those years. I had a very traumatic childhood, beginning with the near death at birth and a whole lot of violence in my family, and ignorance and constant put downs and physical beatings and all that all that stuff.
Mm.
And I had to, I realized that somewhere along the line, I realized that there was a place inside the human spirit that remains whole through it all, that get uh, doesn't become deficient, doesn't become traumatized. There's that little spark. And so I kept looking to feed that spark and have it grow and grow. And as I said, it's been an almost 60-year journey.
Mhm.
You know, I'm 80. I'll be 81 in May, and I teach fluid movement, teach intimacy and relationships. I didn't know what those words meant when I began this journey.
That's incredible. What a career you've had. And
Yeah, it's been interesting.
yes, wow. And your own personal experiences along the way. I really resonate with what you were saying about that spark within that essence of wholeness within someone, despite all the trauma and all the different experiences that people are having that can pull a person apart ultimately. In
Yes, for
in
sure.
your decades now, which is phenomenal. So you've had decades of being out there, giving lectures, working really closely with people. What would you say are some of the important lessons that you've learnt along the way?
Well, there are numerous lessons that I've learned along the way. One is the importance of focusing on expanding my connections.
Mhm,
And that includes my connection to myself as a living body, my connections to my own psyche, my connections to my family, friends, wife, my connection to nature and to what we could call source
mhm,
or the universe or God or that intelligence and power that I believe permeates the universe, and that with practice and intention, we can align with and have our life enriched by i- the sense of its presence.
oh, yes,
So
absolutely.
that's one. Uh, may I name a couple others?
Please do, yes. I'm all ears. I'm soaking this all up, Don.
The second, I think, is recognizing how much more I am than I thought I was. I thought I was, well, initially, this punk kid who grew up in a tenement project, and didn't want to finish high school, but was forced uh, to where I am now, and still sensing there's more. Mhm. That in a sense, almost every human quality, believe that we have the seed within us of every human quality. And that's beautiful. And it's a little terrifying.
Mhm,
You know? And I think we have to learn to master or integrate, for example, those animal instincts, those self-centered, narcissistic, because when we pass through infancy, we are narcissistic. It is all about us, right? But we have to outgrow that.
mm,
And so to summarize that, our identity is so much bigger than we believe it to be. Okay? And the third huge lesson was that no matter what happens, I have the power to develop my own attitude about what happens. And an example that comes to mind, there was a psychologist, you may have heard of him, named Viktor Frankl. I believe he was a
yes.
psychiatrist.
Mhm,
He was in the concentration camps,
mm,
lost his whole family.
mm,
His books were burned. His children, his wife were killed. And he came out of there and was teaching ever since till he died many years later. he was teaching that the one thing they couldn't take away was the freedom to choose his attitude. I I mean, you know,
Mm.
yeah,
It's
it's
very, very powerful
it's very powerful
and freeing.
and freeing.
Mm.
Exactly, exactly. So I think those are some of the biggest lessons that I've learned in my journey.
This is huge, and thank you for reminding me of Frankel. I haven't thought about his experience for a long time, and the essence of what he teaches. Which, as you reminded me, I was like, yes, I remember his work. And being able to the freedom to choose our attitudes, regardless of the scenarios that we find ourselves in. That's where it is so empowering, where we're able to really recognize that we can see the gifts in some of the experiences that we have, even if all the horrors that you've talked about as well.
Mhm.
Obviously in terms of what he experienced. And I remember when I cast my mind back, because I did psychology at university, and our discussions around that with people really kind of having to unpick it and what that would mean. And could you really choose that? To choose your attitude in a scenario like some of the extreme scenarios that he was facing.
Mhm.
And it's a real awakening for people when they realize that they do actually have that freedom of attitude rather than allowing the programming to sort of dictate it, if that makes sense.
It makes total sense, and it's a profound shift in consciousness.
Mm,
Okay? It relieves us from the place of feeling like a victim, like it happens to us and there's nothing we can do. And if we take that attitude towards life itself, then the 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 freedom and the range of possibilities becomes dramatically reduced. Life does it to you, to do the best you can, then you die. You
mm,
know, instead of feeling like a creator, feeling aligned with whatever comes. And you know, this understanding, Louisa, can be easily abused and misunderstood. And for example, someone receives a cancer diagnosis, and someone else says, "Oh, well, aren't you fortunate? You have the power now." That's not what it's about. I mean, that calls for empathy, and we need a whole lot more empathy in our world. But it's a spiritual understanding that yes, I received that diagnosis and it's unfortunate. Now, how do I interact with it? That's where my choice comes in. How do I deal with this? How do I respond? Okay.
yes.
So I,
I
I
love what
hope
you're saying,
that
that how do I respond to the situation around, and that being where the choice is, because of course there may be some circumstances that we haven't chosen. So that's absolutely key for people to have that awareness. And I think that you mentioned about victim mentality, and I certainly think that it's kind of rampant in the world. um, Before people start either having some sort of personal development journey or working with a psychotherapist or a somatic therapist. I think it's a journey that I certainly see in my work as well, where either people have recognized that they may have had that sort of more victim type consciousness, but before they started their journey. And then, of course, they recognize that's why personal development is just such a freeing gift for people to realize
Mhm.
that they have got that freedom of choice of their attitude, and how empowering that is. What an incredible world we live in when we are able to make decisions from that choice rather than the earlier point of our consciousness in terms of that victim mentality.
it's day and night. It's
Mm.
it
And it has
really.
such an impact on relationships. And you mentioned that you've worked with people with their relationships. So I'd love to hear your reflections on, some of the things that you've seen, like what we divorce rates are up, tenfold, 20-fold, whatever the numbers are nowadays. People are living longer, so looking for relationships they need to last longer, as it were, if they're really truly wanting a life partner. Why does it seem so difficult, do you think, for people to achieve that long-term, satisfying, intimate relationship?
Okay, I'm gonna give you an answer that you may not be expecting, and
Go for
that
it.
that is, the fabric of our civilization, the consciousness of our civilization, the field. I'm using different words to attempt to describe this, consciousness
Mm,
of humanity at this point in time has not yet reached the level where sustained intimate relationships have become the norm. We're at a developmental level where there's room, lots of room to grow. Okay. We're getting a sense of who we are. And from there, that next step is to develop intimate relationships. So, for example, within that fabric that I'm describing, Louisa, how many of us were, one, taught to understand what we're experiencing, what we're feeling, our emotions? Two, communicate them to someone in a responsible way. Three, share our souls with our parents, right?
mm,
Four, four, have both our individuality and our family cohesiveness both honored. Both our individuality, our family cohesiveness. Do you know anybody who grew up in that kind of
I
environment?
do you know, there would be like a handful rather than it being the norm, because that is such there's so much that you've said there. That piece around honoring the individuality and the family cohesiveness is huge. There's so much enmeshment out there, isn't there? And people losing their sense of identity and all the conditions that come from whether you are towing the line in terms of what's expected within your family, and people just losing the complete sense of self within that,
Yeah.
which
Yes.
is huge. Is not going to, people's attachment, the whole attachment theory aspect. You see, I see it, the attachment theory playing out in people's businesses in terms of whether they're securely attached or anxiously attached. And it literally, because we have a relationship with our business, has a huge impact. And so this stuff doesn't just impact intimate relationships, does it? It impacts all aspects of life.
All
I
aspects.
I loved what you said, Don, about there's so much for us as humanity in terms of evolution of consciousness for long-term intimate relationships to be the norm. Because you're absolutely right. It's almost I mean, people really celebrate people when they recognize, they're like, oh, you've done 50 years together or whatever it is, and it's amazing. And it's amazing because people are recognizing within that is not, that's not the norm, as it were.
And to have it be still alive at 50 years.
Mm.
I mean, there are a lot of people who spend 50 years together. You see them all over. But are they really still engaged in the process of relationship and intimacy and sexuality and personal development within the relationship? Or are they just doing the same things and living the same way as they did 40 years ago? So,
That's so true.
and that requires, one of the things it requires is an understanding that, for example, I can't imagine that over a 40-year period, I'm going to be aroused by only one woman, that no other woman is going to get my. Yeah, I make a choice to be monogamous.
Mm,
Okay. I make a choice. That's my choice, be monogamous. But I mean, I also have that part of me that's part animal that has no interest in being monogamous. None. Okay. See the and to understand that and to be able to be honest with each other about that. That's one big factor. Another is to be able to, when there's distress, when there's an argument, to be willing to look at oneself. Because, I've counseled many couples over the decades, and invariably, the, the belief is if only he or she would change, then everything would be fine.
mm.
No one comes in and says, okay, I want to look and see how I contribute to this distress. Okay? And that's
Absolutely.
again that huge shift in taking personal responsibility. And if two people can do that, then you got a whole different kind of relationship.
So true. It's moved beyond, isn't it? That piece of it's all their fault, the victim mentality. They're doing it to me. And
Yeah.
being able to take, I talk about it as taking full energetic responsibility for how we're showing up and the beliefs and the emotions and all the things that we're holding. I think there's core work for humanity to be done in this area so that children can benefit growing up in these different environments rather than this
Hmm.
environment where the norm is what used to be. I mean, if I think back to when my grandparents were got divorced, not many people got divorced then, so it really wasn't the norm back then, and it's
Right.
really taken a sort of a turn for it becoming the norm. And just to kind of speak to that, because you also mentioned about how some people can stay in a marriage, let's say for 50 years, but they're not really together in that intimate relationship. They're sort of running alongside, living separate lives, just doing their thing, just to kind of keep the status quo. And I think that's
Hmm.
very damaging for the soul's growth and for anybody kind of growing up within that environment as well.
It's for me, I see it as stifling,
Mm.
but many, many people choose that to the alternative, which we feel very, very risky,
Yeah, of course.
and scary. What do I do if I don't do this? Right. And that the very first public lecture I gave, it was somewhere in the mid early 1970s. I titled it Relationships in Transition, from role awareness to self awareness. And I think that still applies. And I think that's part of the fabric or consciousness shift that I was talking about. And I think that's why there's so many more divorces now. There are other factors too, economic factors, for example, but
Of course.
this sense of expectations. The way I started that lecture, that first one that I'd ever given publicly, was that when my grandfather courted my grandmother, he went through the courting behaviors, asked her to marry, and they never asked, are you fulfilled in this relationship? Are we communicating well? Is this really intimate. You know, he had his roles, she
Mm.
had hers. They did them. They brought 8 children into the world, and that was that. It's completely different now. We want to be fulfilled in the relationship. We expect to be happy. We, have very different expectations than people did back in the 1920s.
So true.
And I think this is part of what may be 1,000-year shift towards really, the relationship is one of the best venues to do our personal work. It's somewhat easy, and I hope I'm not stepping on people's toes with this statement, but it's somewhat easy to go up on a mountaintop and, live alone and write about your enlightenment. But come down and live with another human being and then write about it.
I love that.
That's a very different, the challenges. We challenge each other. And if we're willing to see that as this is part of my work. Yeah.
Mm, so true. I love what you said there about having the enlightenment from the relationship and being able to learn
Yeah.
and heal and grow and expand consciousness together. I wanted to just touch on, because I know you've developed a model. I would love to hear more about this. You mentioned in your bio about the 4 component model of healing. And we'll have listeners who, some may identify with having a traumatic childhood, some may not identify with having a traumatic childhood. So from your perspective, like, why should anyone care about healing?
Oh, I love that question. Louisa, I believe it's what we're here to do. And I believe when a person has an obviously traumatic childhood, it's harder to deny that there's been a lot of wounding, and often the motivation, like in my case, I was aiming towards an early death, and I almost achieved it. I almost died at 59. But the work I had done previously was enough to allow me to survive it and continue. You know, when when someone says, "Oh, I had a good childhood. There was no trauma in my childhood." That's great. Let me ask you a couple questions. Were you able to share your deepest feelings with your parents? Were you able to stand up and disagree with them forcefully, but respectfully and kindly? Right? And most of the time, the answer is no. And suggesting there's some level of mistrust. Okay. Was sexuality honored in your family? Did there's so many, because as I spoke about earlier, it's the very fabric of our culture
Mm,
that's wounded. And we form ourselves, our lives, our families within that fabric. And I believe we're here to wake up. I believe we're here to grow, into, with some of the great spiritual teachers, Buddha, Jesus, what those guys talked about, you know? But it's a growing process. It's not a matter of believing the right beliefs and simply being a good person. It's a matter of transforming our interior to where we're living from and with love in our hearts. And that's no small feat. I'm not there.
mm,
I can get it for 10 minutes in a day, 20 minutes in a day. Yeah, okay, maybe tomorrow. It's like I'm not there.
mm.
And so I think we're here for that. And I have this four component model that says we have to include our living body, our connection to our body. It's not this, empty vessel that we carry around to support our brain. Right? It- it-
I'm with
So,
you. I'm with you.
okay. So that's stage one, and there are all kinds of resources available. Books, videos to help us understand what I mean by that, because it speaks to our the quality of our presence, our aliveness, our vibrancy, our fluidity, our resilience, our adaptability, all of that. So that's one. That's the first component. The second is our psychology, our emotions, our beliefs. You know, we formulate some of our most influential beliefs by the time we're 5 years old. Beliefs like, is the world safe or not? You know, can I trust people or not? I mean, we have those things formulated early on. And the process of waking up, the prospect of leaving a truly prosperous life depends on uncovering some of those beliefs that get in the way. Okay. And then the third component is our relationship capacities. And I think that deserves its own category,
Mm,
because it's so important and there's so much to learn, you know. And again, I'm learning all the time. I'm not sitting on the mountaintop. I'm living with a woman. I've got, grandchildren, children. Uh, i- it's an ongoing learning process. But what's more important, you know, than to evolve the quality of our relationships? And the fourth is a spiritual process, a sense of connection to something beyond ourselves.
mm,
And how can we best evolve that connection? And all four of these, from my perspective, are very interrelated. They're very much influencing one another.
mm.
And, I tease them apart for learning purposes, but in reality, nature doesn't divide it that way.
No.
In nature, it's all together. But when we're awakening to what's important here, I think it's useful to have those categories so that we can, make sure that we're not leaving anything out
Mm. I
of
love
our.
how you've broken them down into the psychology, the mind, the body, the relationships, which is just a
Mhm.
huge,
That's
huge
huge. That's
facet.
huge.
Yeah. And spirituality. That is incredible for people to really kind of get their heads around in terms of those different aspects of healing. Like you were saying, that we're here to grow, and it doesn't stop.
Does not stop. No, no, not my experience anyway.
No, I'm sure you've had it. I've had people going, "Does this ever stop?" And I'm, "No." That's 'cause we're growing, growing and healing, and as another layer, of healing occurs, then the next piece can come through,
Yes.
I find. So I'd love to hear, I know there's so much that you talk about, and it's just been wonderful to hear how these 4 components really bring that wholeness that you were talking about for people to be able to grow into. And I know that one of the things that within the aspect of the body is that, you know, the body is made up of water. I was talking about this at the weekends about how you can program water and how water can completely transform in response to how we treat it. We were drinking some water. We had to change the energy of it because the I don't want to do the brand down, but it was called Liquid Death, and I was like, how can you call water that? Like, it wasn't resonating, let's just put it that way. But it opened up a great conversation around like the our body is primarily water, and it's an aspect of healing. I just love your reflections around what you see the implications of our body being primarily water.
Mm. Oh, I love that question too. You're really good at this, Louisa. I need to say that right now. You really do your homework, and I love your questions. And way back in the late 60s, I believe it was, there was a woman in California named Emily Conrad, and she was a dancer and spent some years in Haiti. And noticed how they moved there was quite different than how they moved where she was originally from in New York City. And she began an inquiry that lasted for the rest of her life. And the inquiry was this: given that we are primarily water, you know, by volume, we are some 65 to 75% water. Even our bones have some 15% water. Now, how does water move? And that was her question, right? And water moves in waves and spirals and pulses. It doesn't move in straight lines. It doesn't move rigidly. Once you put it into a pipe and it loses energy. Right? And she developed this system called continuum. And if you look up Emily Conrad continuum or fluid movement, you can see videos. It's hard to explain. Again, I am going to be 81 years old in a few weeks,
Happy
and
birthday.
thank you, and I'm teaching 40-year-olds how to move fluidly.
Mm,
My workshops are full, you know, and how to get it's a meditation. It's a meditative process whereby we gradually over time deepen our ability to connect our consciousness, our attention into the fluids of our body to move with this kind of it's like the way my wife put it recently was she said for years she was doing continuum, now continuum is doing her.
oh, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
Mm,
It's like the movements are like happening internally and with minimal to no effort. And so it's a powerful, powerful process. And we do have continuum teachers in Europe. So if one looks for the Continuum Teachers Association, you can find where teachers are located.
amazing. Amazing.
Yeah, it is an amazing process, and it's been one of the most helpful because one of the things it's important to understand is that trauma, from the most severe trauma all the way down to what I call simply life negating injunctions.
Mm.
Like, we got a nice, tranquil home here, and there's no abuse, and everybody loves everybody, but sexuality, no, we don't do that here. Or, the famous British keep a stiff upper lip. That's literal. We obey that literally. I've been focusing on my upper lip, like I'm not British, but I've been focusing on my upper lip lately, noticing how much holding is there,
Ah.
how much tension is there when I
Mm.
attempt. They're skeletal muscles. They
Cool.
should be under my conscious control. Ah, try. Try and just move that upper lip gently, the whole lip. And you'd be
Mhm.
surprised by how much we've lost control over those muscles. So
It's such deep
continuum aims
programming.
at reestablishing the connections and thereby the control of those tissues. I'm sorry, I didn't hear what you just said, Louisa.
We've got so much programming, like, collectively around that. Like, that's
Yeah.
such a great example about the stiff upper lip. And as you were saying that, I was thinking there is an aspect of lips getting thinner as we get older. And I was just thinking around the impact of that control physically that we're not aware of consciously, that's going on as we're trying to hold things together by keeping the stiff upper lip, and what that will do to the body. That's
It
incredible. I
limits
love that you're paying
expression.
attention to it.
It limits expression, but it's everywhere. It's
Mm.
everywhere in our body, in our eyes, jaw muscles, ribs, guts, pelvis, legs. We lose a great deal. Think of a cat. Think of a large cat moving in the jungle, and how it looks like they are in touch with every fiber of their being, right?
That's so
They're
true.
everywhere. They're in their
Mhm.
legs and their haunches and in their back muscles. Look at most human beings walking down the street. Yeah.
Yes, I was just imagining walking down London High Street, one of the high streets in London, just thinking, you're so right in that piece about how you can literally just see how people are holding it together.
Holding it together and
Yeah. Mm.
how much we've lost of that animal nature, that fluid, aware nature. Okay?
So true, so true. And the disease that then creates in the body as it's all trapped and compressed and all those
Definitely.
things. There's so much here. Oh my word, Don. Just to wrap up, because we've covered so much, would love to hear sort of what, if you, as you reflect on what we've talked about, what would be the three things that you would want listeners to take away? What are the three tips that you'd love entrepreneurs to
Okay.
take away?
Well, the first one can be paraphrased as, if I can do it, anybody can do it. And
Love that.
another way of saying that is, embark on the journey. Embark on the healing journey. Consider these four huge aspects of your life: the somatic, the psychological, the relational, and the spiritual, and engage in the journey. That's huge. And, you know, one of the big challenges there is people are afraid that they're being disloyal to their parents if they acknowledge their own pain, right? Unless the traumas were huge, people often feel like if they say their childhood had pain, if they were sad or afraid or angry, they're somehow being disloyal. You're not. You're not being disloyal. Your parents were doing the best they could, and we all have room to grow. So embark on the journey, learn to be as truthful with yourself about what's real, what you're feeling, sensations, emotions, desires, needs, wants are. Learn that process. It's not easy. It's a work, but it's worthwhile. How's that, Louisa?
That's awesome. That was like a mic drop moment, Don. Thank you so much. How can people connect with you? Where do you hang out, Don? Tell us all the things. Where can people find you?
Well, my website is www.pathsofconnection.com. Paths, PathsofConnection.com. They can also read my book. I'd like to hold it up if I may.
Go for it.
And
Yeah.
you can
Oh,
get that on Amazon.com. You can also get it on my website, or most bookstores, I believe, can order it. Healing the Wounds of Childhood and Culture, an adventure of a lifetime. And I
oh,
like that part about an adventure because, for me, it was a process of going from feeling like I was an awful wreck, that really didn't belong in the category of human being, to realizing, wow, we're all on the same boat, more or less, and what an adventure it can be. And that's quite a shift. So,
that's huge. That's huge. Well,
how do
huge
you
congratulations on the impact that you've had with all the lives that you've touched. It's just phenomenal, and this book is incredible. I can't wait to read it, and I'm sure encourage everybody to get their hands on a copy, because the wisdom that you've got is second to none. This is just absolutely fantastic. So thank you so much for joining us, Don. Hope you'll
Well, it's
come
been
back
my
another
pleasure.
time.
I'd love to. Just you tell me when, maybe next fall or winter, or let me know.
All righty, that'd be wonderful. Thank you so much, Don. And to everybody who's listening, we'll drop all the links beneath the podcast episode so you can grab them as well. And thank you for joining us and listening. Do share with everybody if you think that this podcast will be of service to them. And do come and say hello to Don and myself on the socials. We'd love to hear how this conversation has impacted you. Until next time, sending you all lots and lots of love, and we'll see you in the next episode. Take care. Thanks for listening to the Infinite Prosperity Podcast. And if you like what you've heard and want to know more, please go to louisahavers.com. We just appreciate you so much. So thank you for listening and hanging out with us. If there's anything that we can do for you, you can email us at louisa@louisahavers.com. Let my team know if you have any ideas for shows that you'd love to hear or topics you want me to talk about. Really looking forward to hearing from you. All right, that is it for this week, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for today. Looking forward to connecting with you again. Until next time, namaste.